Whether it's due to a narrative change, a narrative decision, or just due to the necessity of streamlining a story about a continental war between dozens of different characters in a ton of different places. It's not surprising that House of the Dragon has made changes and cuts from the account that Fire and Blood wove surrounding the Dance of the Dragons. But one of the most surprising alterations in Season 1 was the complete omission of Daeron Targaryen. Prince Daeron Targaryen is the youngest child of Viserys Targaryen and Alicent Hightower, and he rides the young she-dragon Targaryen. Thus far, House of the Dragon has only very vaguely alluded to his possible existence. As eagle-eyed viewers who may have been on the lookout for any sign of Daeron noted, Daemon stated that the Greens had 4 dragons in episode 10 of season 1, which, if anyone was actually doing the math, seems to be an incredibly indirect reference to Targaryen, and therefore seems to very tentatively confirm the existence of the young Prince Daeron as well. However, given what an absurdly obscure nod this supposed mention was, as it's only even possible to notice if you're already aware of Daeron's existence in the books, and you're specifically looking for a potential indication of his existence in the show, it's hard to consider this anything even close to an introduction to his character. It leaves open the possibility of his presence, but nothing more. And, seemingly more importantly, the exclusion of any direct mentions does a lot more to diminish the likelihood of his debut than the addition of 1 green dragon to the head count does to open the door to his debut. This is actually one of the strangest aspects of Daeron's conspicuous absence in the first season of House of the Dragon, too. Counterintuitively, a big reason why his exclusion stands out as strange is because he's not a very important character, nor does he play a particularly important role in the events of Season 1. It's incredibly easy to write him out of that part of the story entirely, but that also means that acknowledging his presence or existence in some form required almost nothing. House of the Dragon could have just as easily mentioned his name, and it would have at least laid the groundwork for his character arc that becomes considerably more relevant later on. George R.R. Martin has addressed Daeron's erasure from House of the Dragon directly, and he has said that Daeron will be a presence in the series at some point. He was only left out of Season 1 because the show didn't have time to introduce him. Martin further explained that Daeron was absent because he was in Oldtown, meaning that if, or apparently when, he is brought into the story, he'll likely be playing a similar role that he did in the books. So, if his character isn't particularly important to the plot points that unfolded in Season 1, if the storyline thus far isn't really affected by his absence, and if he's eventually going to be in the TV show anyway, then why does his removal earlier on even matter? And in fairness to House of the Dragon, covering around 2 decades of imaginary history in 10 episodes doesn't leave a lot of room for any non-necessities. Given how much they actually needed to address in order for the show to make sense, cutting out any non-essentials is an understandable choice. But on the flip side, Daeron's very existence along with his separate storyline are a pretty strong, if underappreciated element of world-building during the Dance of the Dragons, and including him would have given the broader story a scope that otherwise didn't exist. In the most fundamental sense, Daeron's exclusion damages the world-building in a way that nearly every book reader has already clocked. House of the Dragon is an adaptation of certain segments of Fire and Blood, but it's a TV show that needs to be comprehensible to a general audience, most of whom haven't read the books. Ergo, watching the characters go through everything that they do in Season 1, from Viserys and Alicent's wedding to the development of their family, to the death of Viserys to the coronation of Aegon and every single massive change that his family has gone through in between, to see all of that and never once see anyone mention that Alicent has a whole-ass other child is really very strange. Or more specifically, for Daeron to never even warrant a mention in Season 1, but to then suddenly be introduced in Season 2, or perhaps even beyond that, will be very bizarre and confusing to both the viewers who are familiar with the character and have been waiting for him to show up, and with the viewers who have no idea who he is and will undoubtedly be thrown for a loop when another green sun appears seemingly out of nowhere. But Daeron's absence has more subtle consequences too. And it's unfortunate that he was one of the many elements of the story that was left on the cutting room floor in Season 1. Again, one of the biggest losses in Daeron's removal is felt in the world building of House of the Dragon. Clearly, the series didn't have a lot of time to play with. But one of the ways in which Daeron's existence feels relevant is in that it essentially evens the score between the blacks and the greens. One extra Targ tower might not seem that important, but the fact that Rhaenyra has Jace, Luke, and Joffrey, while Alicent has Aegon, Aemond, and Daeron, creates a narrative symmetry that adds a little extra weight to what needs to happen in order for this war to come to its end. If the Greens want to cement their claim, they need to go through Rhaenyra's 3 illegitimate children. And if the Blacks want to cement theirs, they need to kill Aegon, Aemond, and Daeron. Alicent bearing 3 of Viserys' children that look every inch the Targaryen, while Rhaenyra tries to put her obviously strong sons into the line of succession, only adds to the drama. And it doesn't seem accidental that George R.R. Martin created this 3 versus 3 rivalry, so it would have been nice to see that play out on screen. Furthermore, while Daeron isn't a vital player in the storyline that played out during Season 1, he does have an important role in some of the bigger plot points down the line. And while House of the Dragon still hasn't missed their opportunity to introduce him, his complete absence doesn't bode super well for his future development. House of the Dragon has done a pretty good job of not falling into the same narrative traps that ultimately nerfed the ending of Game of Thrones. But this is one issue that is kind of concerning. After all, Game of Thrones similarly tried to streamline the story and consolidate the sprawling narrative by omitting certain characters and doling out those characters' storylines to other major players. And while that didn't seem to have a huge impact at the start, by the end, the overall story became incomprehensible because of their absence. If Daeron's character is excluded or diminished in a similar way, then House of the Dragon could be setting itself up for a similar kind of crash and burn. But one of the most exciting and successful aspects of House of the Dragon thus far has been the show's ability to flesh out characters that didn't have much dimension in the thin historical accounting of the Dance of the Dragons that exists within Fire and Blood. Given how much they've been able to alter and enhance each individual player and their interplay with each other, it would have been great to see Daeron in the mix. Understanding who he is, how he relates to his siblings and family, and the role that he plays in the build-up to the war would only enhance his character and the story as a whole. However, when it comes to world building in House of the Dragon, what Daeron truly offered in Season 1, which would have been fascinating to see, is a look into Oldtown. One of the significant failings of Game of Thrones that House of the Dragon has yet to rectify is acting as if all the action is going on in a few different places. And, while King's Landing is the capital and a key location in the Dance of the Dragons, it's hardly the only important stronghold in Westeros. Oldtown is arguably as valuable, if not even more so, than King's Landing. And while House Hightower's ability to pose a significant threat to the Blacks is confusing from the perspective of a show-only viewer, anyone with a deeper understanding of Westerosi history and politics understands that Oldtown explains why a second son and Viserys' second wife could potentially overtake Westeros completely. King's Landing may be the hub of House Targaryen's power, but Oldtown has been the hub of the entire continent's power for thousands of years before Westeros even heard the name Targaryen. Oldtown has been the cultural, economic, and political center of Westeros, at least as much as there was a center of Westeros, since humans have existed in Westeros. So, being the family that has ruled over Oldtown for millennia has put the Hightowers in a position of borderline unfathomable power. And that's a significant reason why this war became a war at all. Alicent and Otto are undeniably major players in the dance, but House Hightower at large has had a lot of strings to pull. So getting a glimpse into what was going on in another key location outside of King's Landing, Dragonstone, and perhaps Driftmark would have made the build-up to this civil war feel more significant. Ironically, a look into Oldtown would have easily explained why Daeron was absent for so much of the story, including missing his own father's death and his brother's coronation. because the Greens set themselves up in a position of significant advantage by putting themselves in control of King's Landing and Oldtown, the country's two major cities, by the time that Viserys died. Clearly, Rhaenyra and Daemon had the advantage when it came to dragon numbers, and they were relying on that to win the war. But when Viserys finally kicked the bucket, the Hightower faction already had complete control over the two most powerful places in the Seven Kingdoms. And it's hard to overstate how relevant that is, especially when they were at a potential disadvantage when it comes to firepower. However, there is a flip side to that coin. Because yes, they had control over King's Landing and Oldtown, but they also had to maintain defensive control over King's Landing and Oldtown. And if the Blacks managed to overtake or destroy either of these cities, then the war would be lost. So, maintaining Daeron's presence in Oldtown was basically a necessity. It actually does make sense for him to be absent for the majority of Season 1's narrative, because he's doing something vitally important that explains his absence. But cutting him out completely makes him and the entire storyline in Oldtown seem totally unimportant, while at least acknowledging his existence would let the audience know that there is more to the story than what we're seeing. Ultimately, this might, hopefully, be irrelevant. George R.R. Martin has directly said that Daeron Targaryen will be introduced into House of the Dragon, and he was only omitted due to time constraints. And ideally, that means we'll see his story and his development as a character in the way that we've seen everyone else's. But leaving him out of Season 1 completely, barring one small potential mention, is still a mistake that can't be rectified now. Regardless of where Daeron comes into the narrative, his character will always be playing catch-up with the audience. Hopefully, when he finally does show up, Daeron Targaryen at least gets his due. But what do you think? Was it a mistake to wait an entire season to introduce Viserys and Alicent's youngest son? Leave your comments and opinions below, and if you're interested in more content like this, like and subscribe.